Okay guys, according to the latest statistics on chimney fires, there are over 25,000 chimney fires per year in the United States that are responsible for over $125 million in property damage. And really, the most sobering statistics relate to the deaths and the injuries that result from chimney fires. It's absolutely incredible. The more I study about creosote, and how it's made and how it burns and the damaging effects of it, the more and more I'm convinced that this little stove that I've come up with is one of the best options that anybody could ever take advantage of. Creosote buildup like this is the direct result of inefficient burning fireplaces that don't even have the capacity to burn hot enough to burn all the carbon that is in the fuel that they're using. And it can be easily solved. Really, guys, to solve it, all you have to fully understand are three concepts. Concept number one, oxygen, heat, and fuel combine to separate carbon molecules. They release a gas, and that gas combusts into fire. I know fire science can be made into a 3-hour course, but it's really not that complicated. Concept number two that you have to fully understand. Not all carbon molecules are created equal, meaning the flash point of different carbon molecules can be higher or lower to separate those molecules. You take this clean burning pine fire, for instance, and throw some dirty dogwoods on it, and what happens? Well, we all know what happens. It begins to smoke. All that smoke is unburnt carbon molecules that didn't have sufficient enough oxygen or heat to separate and let off the gas that's in them to combust. Even if you had enough draw in the flue to pull that smoke up the chimney, a certain percentage of it is going to combine with the 15 to 20% moisture level that is even in the best cured woods and turn into, you guessed it, creosote. And the third concept that must be understood, and I cannot underscore and emphasize this enough, the driving force behind the whole system is the chimney or the stovepipe. It is the oxen that pulls the cart. It is everything. So many people that have tried and failed at putting these rocket stoves together think that the heat riser is the driving force. They could not be more wrong. That is faulty thinking, and it is dangerous thinking. That is putting the cart before the horse. If they really believe that, they better get really good at soils mechanics and expansion and contraction and make sure that that whole snake and serpentine system is sealed up good, because that means the heat riser is pushing all the exhaust through the system, creating a positive pressure in it. In any stove system, you always want a negative pressure or a vacuum to mitigate any potential leaks or carbon monoxide poisoning. I have read all the books and seen all the literature on rocket stoves, and one thing they all have in common is they all have a similar depiction to this one, where the heat riser pushes an exhaust through and out. This particular example, which I've seen similar to in almost every book I've looked in, doesn't even have a stovepipe on it. It's just they claim it will exhaust down. And that is just faulty thinking, guys. We have known it since the dawn of time. The only real quantifiable force that we can depend on in these whole systems is the buoyancy of air when it is heated. That hot air rises. And the hotter it is, the faster it accelerates up, and the more weight it can carry. These things here start off on their side, on the ground, with a big hoop, and they blow them up with a little bit of air and then force warm air into them. When they become sufficiently hot, they will accelerate upwards until the atmospheric resistance on them creates an equilibrium, at which time they will continue to rise at a constant speed so long as the heat energy being put into them is equal to the heat being dissipated from them due to atmospheric heat exchange losses. Hot air balloons can be very dangerous. They do require a skilled operator to make sure that the fuel to oxygen ratio being put into the balloon is maintained. If any unburnt gases get into the balloon, the results can be absolutely devastating, as seen here in this clip. In stove systems that don't burn efficient and clean, it can result in unburnt carbon and creosote buildup, which will eventually, if not maintained well, result in ultimately the same devastating effects as a hot air balloon that has unspent gases in it. Now, guys, let's look at the history of rocket stoves a little bit. They started out just basically in an L-shaped configuration. The only reason they work at all is because of their dimension. The riser is the exact same dimension as the burn chamber. This allows the oxygen that's being pulled up by the riser to be pulled through in great quantities over the fuel source in the burn chamber. The fuel causes a restriction in the burn chamber, and that allows massive amount of oxygen to feed it and get it very hot, and therefore it rockets up the riser at an accelerated pace. However, they still didn't burn terribly clean. And one day a very wise man said, hey, let's insulate the pipe so that it doesn't lose the heat energy, and that heat can be left in the riser as long as possible to burn as much gas as can possibly be burned. And it worked, and they began burning much, much cleaner. Because of the insulation, they actually began burning so hot that they were spalling the steel and getting it red hot, and it wasn't lasting very long. It became evident very quickly that steel was not going to work inside these stoves with the insulation around them. I initially thought that I could get away with having a steel batch box, and boy was I wrong. Look at the spalling and the melting that's going on the steel towards the back of this heat chamber in the stove that I built for Julie. As you can see, last week when I was there and I was burning it, it burns very hot. The aircrete and the insulation is doing its job. Toward the back of the stove, you can see it is glowing red hot, the back half of the stove. That heat that is generated from the insulation keeping the hot gases in there is plenty to gas off and burn any carbon that any wood can put off. I took this picture about 5 to 8 minutes into burning it, and it's burning at over 2,000 degrees. And the way I ascertained this was it melted my welds. And I know that the welding alloy I used melts at about 2,000 to 2,200 degrees, and that soft steel melts around 2,700 degrees. When I understood that I wasn't going to be able to get away with using steel in the batch box on this because it burns so hot, as you can see in this depiction of the new stove, a cutaway view of it, I'm using a tile. This is NASA technology. I did a lot of research on this, and it is a alumina cement ceramic fiber core tile that I came up with, and it will withstand heat of up to 3,600 degrees. And obviously it's insulated all around it with aircrete, and this stove is just going to burn absolutely incredibly. As the gases go up the riser in this stove, there will be absolutely no creosote buildup, as there is none in Julie's stove either. If you take a look at some of these photographs of when we took Julie's stove apart, you'll see how incredibly clean it was on the inside after a full year of use. Now guys, we put this stove back together with full confidence that that heat riser would last for years and years. It performed incredibly, and it remained extremely strong. Now here is the exhaust portal. No creosote buildup whatsoever. There was none in the bench. I stuck my arm completely up it and it came out clean. Now, there was a little bit of dust, just kind of a brownish powder. In the event that you wanted to clean that out, it would be extremely easy. We just stuck a vacuum cleaner up it. You can just take a shop vac and put a piece of PVC pipe on it and just stick it up there. You can also put a piece of flex hose on it to go around the bins if you want. But it was so extremely clean, we were just really thrilled with it. Now guys, the stove pipe performed equally as well in Julie's stove for the entire season. The Aircrete insulated double wall stovepipe that I created is what drives the whole engine. It is the physical properties of Aircrete that make it possible. Aircrete not only is an insulation with all the little air bubbles in it, but it also absorbs the heat and it holds it for hours and hours. Consequently, what you end up with is a stovepipe that remains warm throughout the whole process. And because it's warm and still giving off heat and creating heat inside of it, it continues to pull, even though the carbon and the fuel that's in your burn chamber has begun to diminish. It still continues to pull through, and it pulls it until it's completely burned out. And so you end up with a very clean system. Next, I'm going to discuss the mechanics of the entire system and how it accomplishes all these amazing things. Stay tuned, guys.